So my daughter's name was Vanessa. She was born on October 6th, 2019 at 4:05 in the morning. She was going to be a unique addition to our life in the sense that I never really saw myself as someone that really wanted to have kids or even expand our family at all. If you knew me, if you knew me before I even, met Caitlin, you would. I was the guy that you didn't hand your kid to because it just felt really awkward and uncomfortable for me, and I was like, the idea of having children would make me run very quickly in the opposite direction.
Welcome to Still a Part of Us, a podcast where moms and dads share the story of their child who was stillborn or who died in infancy. I'm Lee Red, and on this episode, Alfonso is telling the story of his daughter Vanessa, who was stillborn at 37 weeks. Just to be aware, the audio quality of this interview is a little lacking. We sincerely apologize to Alfonso, and we hope that you guys are able to enjoy this episode. As a word of caution to our listeners, this story contains emotional triggers of stillbirth and infant loss. Please keep yourself emotionally and mentally healthy and seek help if needed. Also be aware that these birth stories may differ from his or her partner, as these accounts are told from their own perspective through the lens of trauma, heartache, and the passage of time. Please respect our moms and dads who are brave and gracious to share their children with us.
Me and Caitlin met, and then she had, that's when my stepson came into my life, and he was, I want to say, right at a year. I had thrown into what I call a shake and bake family. So, it was an interesting transition at first. It was not something that I enjoyed initially, but then over time, just became very accustomed to it and surprised myself at how much I enjoyed being a dad.
Oh, yeah.
Having said that, the road to talking about having another kid there was a lot of resistance there too, because it was like, for me it was logistically scary. I'm a big numbers guy, so it was like, we're already paying for daycare for this, we can't support this, and for to accomplish you going to school and this, that, and the other. There's so many different life factors that for me, I always would just overthink it. And honestly, a lot of the times it was like, sometimes it would just be easier if an oops would just happen. And, but eventually she kind of talked me into it. And then I was like, okay, well, that's fine. We'll go ahead and start trying, because of some of the medications that I have to take. The doctor told me, hey, it might take a while, so, fully expect that this could take 6 months to a year. And they even recommended that I get, tested or whatever to see if, if I'm going to need help or something.
Yeah.
So in my head, I was like, oh, good. This probably isn't going to be like a thing for a long time. I don't have to worry about this at all.
Give me some time. Give me some time to put it in my mind.
It took a month. We conceived the first month, so there was.
Your boys can swim.
We are very compatible, or I guess the few guys that I do have down there are triathletes, or all of the above. I don't know. Whatever the case may be. I remember when Caitlin told me, I just came home from work, and it was funny because the entire afternoon she was very short with me. Like, she kept getting an attitude with me because I was taking so long to get home, and I was like, I'll be there in a minute. Like I got some, I have some things to tie up. I'll get home in a second. I get home and everything, and my son runs up to me saying, about how we're having a baby. Now, that didn't really throw me at all, because he had been saying random things like that for a while, swearing up and down that she was pregnant, this, that, and the other, because a friend of ours had recently conceived. So that was just in his head that we were gonna, they had one, so we're gonna have one.
Yeah.
To it, I was just kind of getting my take, and, started to take my uniform off and everything. And that's when he shoved a pregnancy test into my face. And it wasn't one of the cheap ones either. It was one of the digital ones that just in big letters just says pregnant. And I was like, oh. And I don't know. I remember I was very happy with my reaction. I know that, considering the road, I told all that backstory. I was actually concerned about what my initial reaction was going to be. Like, I hope it's happy. Like, I hope it's elation or, something good. I hope it's not like, oh, it actually happened. And it was a very happy moment. It was, it was just about as wholesome as you could make it. It was, it was nice. And I remember I had always wanted a daughter anyway, for a number of reasons, whether, with my familial history with like cholesterol and high cholesterol and heart disease, it's all on the male side, like it's on male genetics. And, so I was like, well, I hope, if we have a girl, she won't have to worry about all that stuff. And then there's just the other aspect of it that I think all the dresses are cute. And I just, would have just absolutely loved that. So I think the culminating thought of that was when, after, the initial reveal and everything, my son was like, yay. Now, we didn't actually know the gender yet. This is just him, talking as a toddler and wanting a daughter, or wanting a sister, rather. Runs down the hallway, flops down on the floor, and farts. And at that moment, I was like, great. Yeah, I really hope this is a girl, because I'm not really sure that I can handle that multiplied. There's enough fart jokes in this house as it is. We probably need sparkles and unicorns every once in a while. Fast forwarding to when essentially the gender reveal ultrasound technician finally got to the part where she could see what gender it was.
Mm-hmm.
It was like, and it's a girl, and it was like, yay, and it's big, all that. So because we had elected not to do the blood test to determine early. So I don't know, especially from that point on, it was like, because I had already had like in my head what I wanted to name her and everything. So that was just a real solid bonus. I remember another defining part of the pregnancy being very frustrated with feel her kick. And she'd be like, oh, quick, it's happening. And she would grab my hand and put my hand on her stomach. And I'd be like, Caitlin, I can't feel it. And she was like, no, I swear to God, it's there. I was like, okay, I believe you. I've seen the ultrasounds. I know she's in there, but I can't feel it yet. So one night we were sitting on the couch, and she was like, honey, it's happening. And I was like, I'm not putting my hand over there, because I'm going to put my hand over there. I'm going to sit there for 5 minutes thinking I feel something, or maybe I do and don't. And she's like, no, wait. And she grabbed my hand and put it there. And that was when I felt her first kick. And it was enough to like bring tears to my eyes. It was because it was the first time that I actually had physical contact, at least some kind of physical contact and anything. Because the funny thing with being a dad is like, there's just, there's not really anything for you to do. Like you did your part when you did the conceiving. Outside of that, you're just kind of, I guess, helping do the dishes when she's tired or something. Like there's not really anything functionally for you to do. She's doing all the incubating. So you're just kind of a bystander. So, she's already been feeling like, the kicks and everything and, the physical changes. And for me, it's like, well, I don't have a drinking partner anymore. That's probably at that point in the pregnancy. So it was one of the real, like, it was a real defining moment in the sense that I finally felt like I was more a part of it. And there was also a part of me that was still kind of in denial, not in a bad way, but it was just sometimes I would genuinely forget she was pregnant because she wasn't showing yet. And I couldn't feel it. So it was like, I mean, I know it's there, but, it was just easy to not really think about all the time. And that changed once I actually felt it. And really entertainingly confusing, fun feeling all wrapped into one, because whenever, as she got bigger and she would kick, it was like, seeing her stomach morph and move and pulsate was like, it's like, it's weird, but it's cool at the same time,
There's
so it
something
was,
inside there.
especially, I work as a 911 paramedic, so I have a fundamental knowledge of what's going on in there, and physiologically what happens and all that. So it was kind of neat to actually see it developing in real time in that aspect, in a clinical sense. It was kind of cool. So, it was just, I remember, like, me and my wife tease each other all the time. So as she would become more and more pregnant, it was, she started to develop like the waddle. And it was funny because it drove her, and I remember driving her nuts because she couldn't, Vanessa was small, so Caitlin didn't start showing really until like later on in the pregnancy, and the whole time she's like mad. She's like, I don't even look pregnant, I just look fat. I was like, oh, you don't look fat, you're developed, you're fine. And then finally she had, when she did like actually have like the bump and everything, it was just like, and suddenly it looked like that she ate a beach ball, and so she like developed this waddle that was just hysterically cute. And I would end up teasing her relentlessly over it anytime that she would walk somewhere. So that was a fun part of it. And then the 3D ultrasounds, I think, were the coolest part, though, and I'm glad that we opted to do that, because there's a couple photos that we have of her. One of them, she's like sucking her thumb, and then the other one, she has like a smile. And it's just, I don't know, it's fast forwarding to now, considering how things happen. I mean, we have photos and everything, post-birth and all that, but I think the ones that make me the happiest are those, because I know that in those photos that she's still alive.
Yeah.
I was just telling my wife this the other day. It's odd because, well, maybe it's not, but the photos that portray her, afterwards don't really stir as much emotion for me anymore, but the ultrasound photos do. And I don't know, maybe my guess is because I know that she was still alive in those pictures.
Yeah.
And maybe I've already gone through the acceptance process, the fact that, that she is gone. So I don't know, but I've always found that to be somewhat odd and interesting. But the morning of the 5th, I had it was fire prevention week, so we were doing a pub ed like promotional kind of thing, and we were my wife Harrison, is obsessed with fire trucks, so we always take him there, and I walk him around and show him all the props and everything, and they have all kinds of activities to do. And so Caitlin was there, and she had made a couple comments about how, like, her lower back was hurting and whatnot, but that wasn't entirely, that's real. I mean, she's 38 weeks, like that's pretty normal, really. So we didn't really think very much of it. She stayed for a little while, and I did the event, and then after that I went to drill, and because I do reserve duty in the military, and from there it just kind of seemed like a normal day. And then she texted me and said that she hadn't felt Vanessa move in a while, and I was like, it didn't really register what that really meant, and I was like, well, what do you mean? And she was like, I'm not sure. I think I'm going to go to the doctor to have, just to make sure everything's okay. And I was like, oh, all right. I remember from that moment feeling this like numbness. It was like I hadn't quite actually thought the possibility of her being dead. Honestly, I thought maybe like, is this going to be like, some sort of emergency situation where I just have to get, where surgery and, just get here. Like, I didn't know. There was a million different possibilities that were, going through my head, but none of them really included, the possibility that, that could happen. And it was one of those things where, you read all the medical textbooks and everything, all the parent literature, you don't really hear a lot in the way of stillbirth. And even SIDS, you don't really hear as much about anymore. And as far as the pregnancy stuff is concerned, you've got a couple of the first trimester milestone where if you clear that, then, your chances of miscarrying drop significantly. And then once you get to there's better odds because they can they'll be a preemie, but they have a shot. It's not a guarantee, but there's things they can do. And really, once we got past the 27-week mark, it was, for us, it was like, okay, we're pretty much free and clear now. Like this is, so death had not, it wasn't remotely, anywhere, on my radar at all. I mean, I know accidents can happen during birth, but it was like, it didn't even occur to me. And when my phone rang, I knew that it was bad. I didn't know what it was going to be, but I knew it was bad because if it had been nothing, she would have just texted me. It would have just been a simple text like, "Hey, at the doctor, things are fine. I'll call you in a little bit and tell you what the doctor said." It would have been something like that. It would not have been a phone call. So I just knew the second that phone rang that it was going to be bad. And I answered, and she said that the only words that she could get out were, "I lost the baby." I don't really remember a lot after that. At the time, my function with the service that I work for afforded me a take-home vehicle with, lights, the whole, the light package and everything. And I remember getting in that and turning the lights and siren on and driving at the speed of light to get to Charleston. And I don't really remember the drive. It's really hazy up until actually getting into the hospital room. And it was it was just a very, I've done a lot of clinical time in the hospitals and the OB ward and everything, part of paramedic school, and just going through, certain peds classes and whatnot. And it was, it's always vibrant, it's always very lively. There's lights, there's bright colors, there's people, there's a lot of activity, there's monitors out the yin yang, there's all kinds of stuff going on. And the room that we were in, there was a couple recessed lights, and it was oddly, it was very surreal. The recessed lights were on, and she was standing underneath one of them, and it just felt sad. And it was just, I don't know, the surroundings were oddly supportive of what, the environment was oddly supportive of what was actually occurring at the time. There was an air of, because she was still pregnant. I mean, she still had the belly and everything. Like, it just wasn't, the doctor finally came in. I think this was the third or fourth time that they had tried to verify it with the ultrasound. And, that was the moment where, when she visualized on the ultrasound where the heartbeat should be, and it was just completely still. It was just like, I remember that was the first wave. Then everything after that was just so, I mean, we were fortunate. I've heard some horror stories, but the hospital staff was actually really great to us. But it was just, I mean, it was awful. There are no words to adequately convey the raw emotions. And, other than, the analogy of, you've gotten on a roller coaster and you're on that slow ascent up. And that's what that part felt like. It was that slow ascent up to the peak before that first drop. And I remember, they were talking about induction and everything. And that first wave that hit me was the realization that she's still going to have to go through this entire birthing process. Like, I don't know, at that point, you're not able to function as a rational person. You can't, it's the higher, whatever the higher thinking portion of the brain is, it's just not firing properly at that point. So I don't know what I thought was going to happen, but it hadn't occurred to me that was still going to be a thing. And so we were going to have to sit in labor for however long. And so they started her on the Pitocin and everything and all that, and it just felt so, I don't know, it was hours and hours of just awkward conversation and crying. And I remember having to I don't know, regular intervals, I would have to leave the room. I had some guys from the fire naive and sort of just go talk with them for a little bit, or just get out of that room, because I just at that point I was trying to function as a support system for her, while trying not to completely fall apart myself, which that was like ice skating uphill, but I was able to at least adequately do it. There were still some moments where I just needed to leave the room to just take a breath and kind of, rally a little bit and then come back. So that was the night was largely patterned like that until, I want to say, her water broke sometime. I think it was time around then, and it was something where it was like, this is happening. And I think that there was, well, I know we both shared the emotion in that, maybe somehow, some way, there's something that they're not seeing, and this is going to be okay. Like, maybe this is just like a bad dream. There's some sort of fluke. Whatever the case maybe something will happen, and she'll come out crying. And the contractions started getting regular, and then the process stopped, and the room was just deafeningly silent. Like I say, I've done enough clinical time to experience several live births, and and I've also helped deliver several of them myself in the ambulance setting, and it was just deafening. Instead of a room full of people, moving around and everything, and bright lights and all that, it was that dim lighting, the doctor and a nurse, and, a very lifeless, body. And I remember cutting the cord, and I don't think, I thought I had cried pretty hard in moments leading up to that. I did not think it was possible to feel the degree of pain that I felt in that moment, because that was the moment right there that it was like, this is it. She is not coming back. This is the finality of the situation really struck at that moment. And it was a moment that it will be etched in my head for the rest of my life. It was something that, you just knew that at that point, nothing in your life is ever going to be the same. All of a sudden, you're having to make these decisions that you just, no one thinks about this stuff.
Yeah, we're too young to.
No one thinks about, what paperwork they're going to have to file with their life insurance company for a dead child. Like, no one thinks about, like, how do you even plan a funeral for this? Like, what, no one, it's just logistically, you're like, I don't know. Like, what am I, they're asking you to make these decisions, what funeral service do you want to use, or what cremation service or whatever. And I'm like, I don't know, they hand you, and it's not their fault. It's not like there's anything they can do that, better about it. They're just giving you the information, but they hand you this sheet, and it's got a list of, vendors on there, and you're like, well, I don't know. This is not a decision that, who goes to the OB ward thinking that they're going to have to select from a list of cremation facilities. Now, to some of those businesses' credit, they do, they do those services at no cost, which I thought at least that was, kind of them to do that. Um, as far as the moments during that time, I think we were really lucky in the sense that we had nurses that were very caring, passionate, capable, and they kind of had a little bit of a routine down with, making bookmark, just a lot of like memorabilia type stuff that I just honestly would not have, that I'm very happy that I have now. One of the nurses even took a lock of her hair, which if she hadn't done that, I wouldn't have ever known what color her hair was, because she had one of those knit caps on.
Yeah.
So she ended up having her mother's hair. It was black. And it was, we didn't discover how irritating this was until months after the fact, but they told us that they had photographers there that could, do photos and everything, of her, in her gown and whatnot. And, we opted, yeah, but, we wanted that. And I remember being infuriated at a couple things. For one, this company had the audacity to, they gave us one photo so we could use it for her service, and then they had the audacity to want to charge us $85 to release the rest of them. Now, I get it if I go out and I hire a photographer to come and take pictures of my child in the hospital, but when your company is advertising that your photographer is a volunteer, that to me says that you are doing this out of the kindness of your heart, and this is not something that to me, it was very predatory. I remember I was not kind to that customer service representative calling about that, and because not only that, the photos were completely unaltered. They made no effort of touching up some of the photos and everything, and even worse so, again, the only reason I know what color her hair is because one of the nurses took a snip of it, because the photographer did not even take her cap off in any of them. She didn't pose her. They're all one pose, really, and it was infuriating. I think that was one of the most, as far as how we were treated by anything, that was the worst part. That was almost like a delayed reaction, because we didn't get that one until later.
And that's a
leaving the hospital was a that was certain things happen. I'm not a particularly religious person, but I will say that certain things happen in weird, like the timing is just, we're walking out of the hospital and, with, no baby or anything like, well, backing up for a second, I remember, there was that period where, we were able to hold her and everything. And, they offered to let us use like a cot or something. And, far be it for me to tell any parent how to handle this part. I know that there's some parents that spent hours and hours there. I couldn't do it. There was a point where we were taking turns holding her, and it just seemed like I was locked in this cycle of just ripping my heart out every single time. And there was one point where I couldn't take it anymore. And I told my wife, like, honey, it's time. And I hated saying it. To this day, it still is very painful to think about that moment. I don't regret making that decision, because the fact of the matter is that I personally, just my opinion, it just seemed like it was delaying the inevitable of what I knew had to happen. And I don't, in our current state, I just didn't think it was making things any better. No amount of time is adequate. It wouldn't have mattered if we had held her for 20 minutes or for 20 hours. At the end of the day, that she was no longer living, and we were going to have to say goodbye at some point. So that was terrible, and to this day, just I remember that part very vividly. Shortly after that, they kept us in observation for a little bit, and then finally released us. And the drive home, going back to that, was it started raining as we walked out of the doors of the hospital. And as we were walking out, there was a woman in a wheelchair holding a newborn. And it just didn't seem fair. Like, that was the first moment where I had like that thought of like, this isn't fair. Like, not only did this just happen, but now, now I have like, now I'm like quite literally walking past, this parallel version of us where we should be leaving that, someone should be wheeling her out in a wheelchair while she's holding our daughter. And this is, instead we're walking out to get into the back of one of my chief's vehicles for him to drive us home. And the rain followed us to the house. I remember that being odd, but on the way home, it was kind of quiet. I think it was a mix between us being exhausted and everything else. The irony of the whole thing was that so my birthday was on the 7th of October, and this was the 6th when she was born. And my wife had been planning a surprise party for me, and I made the decision against her will. I know she didn't want to do it. I had to kind of drag her kicking and screaming through some of the social stuff, but I think afterwards, I think she was happier that the house had people in it. I told her that I'd still like some people to come over, because at that point it changed from being about us to now it's about us and our son. And that was only the first part of that. We opted not to bring our son to the hospital. We didn't inform him until we got home. I don't regret that decision. I think it was better that he remember her from the ultrasound photos, that I didn't have to explain to him why her cheeks were discolored and stuff like that. I'm glad that he does not have that mental image. So I don't regret that decision at all. But for him, he was really excited about the party for me. And I think most parents would agree that, a real important survival tool for a toddler is to keep them on a routine, that things should be kept as normal as possible so that they can, it's best for they don't handle change very well. So we went forward with having some people over, and it was hard, but I think people were happy to be there. If nothing else, to normalcy, tell him, and he understood. Thankfully, he didn't ask too many questions. We kept the answers straight to the point. I don't know if vague is the right word, but we tried to avoid giving more details than was necessary. Just to explain that, Vanessa, something happened with Vanessa. The doctors don't know why, but mommy's not pregnant anymore. And it was that was dreading thinking on my father what had happened. But having that party that day, like some of our friends brought their kids over, and he was able to facilitate playing and whatnot, and it I think helped a lot. And having people there to play interference with our son was super helpful. My wife finally passed out on the couch just out of exhaustion for a couple hours, and it was about that moment. I finally made the phone call to tell my father about it. I was dreading that because he had a pretty major stroke in May. So I knew during his recovery, trying to come back from the stroke, his physical therapy, one of his motivators was that, he wanted to be well enough to be able to hold her again, or to be able to hold her, period. And that crushed him. I've I have only seen that man cry once in his entire life. And that was the second time, I guess. But those were I think the two hardest ones for me. Once that day was over with, things changed gears in an odd way. It was obviously a lot of crying and whatnot. I didn't have Caitlin was useless. Like she emotionally, she was just just checked out. Like cognitively, she was gone, and it led us to because we still had to plan a service and everything. And it was odd because I was definitely not in a good place mentally, but I was very high functioning. Like I was getting up, I was getting up in the morning and doing, different tasks and making phone calls and making arrangements and handling this and handling that, doing all the paperwork and making the appointments and getting, right away, hitting the ground running with, scheduling therapy and looking for support group activities and just all this stuff. Like I was just in this mode of just working and doing. And, which was really beneficial because, she at one point wanted to try to, do flowers or get flower arrangements set up, and she couldn't even make it through that phone call. She was just too, understandably so. It's not a criticism. Just she was, we were just in two very different phases at that point. And I think that right there is, I talked about earlier about how the pregnancy itself is just very different from the father and mother perspective because the mother's doing all of the things. I think that most fathers are very mechanically inclined. It's that whole, your wife has a bad day and you end up trying to fix it, and she gets mad at you for trying to fix it because all she wants you to do is just listen. Because that's what we do. Man see problem, man wants to fix. Like it's just, I think for a lot of, I try not to swing too much into stereotypes, but it just seems like a real common denominator amongst most fathers. Like, this is broken, I want to fix it. There's a task that needs to be done, I'm going to do it. And I think one of our support groups, a father in there who is an engineer said it very well, where he was like, I design things, I build things, I fix things for a living. Like I've designed 20-story structures and bridges, and why can't I fix this? It's, and that right there was a real defining moment for me of like really helping to understand like where my thinking was, because in that moment, like those couple weeks leading up to our service, it was a week and a half, I think, that in that little time period, like it was like those were things I could do. I can make all the arrangements and I can make all the appointments and I can make the phone calls. Like these are things that I can do to maybe fix some aspects of things. Like I can do these things. And then after after the funeral service, things changed gears. Everything, there was nothing else to do. It was done. The appointments were made, cremation was done, the service was done, the paperwork was filled out, everything was registered and submitted. It was all done. There was nothing else to do other than just be here. And that was where things shifted, to where me and my wife completely traded places. It then became, she was the one that was like starting to pick up on doing a lot of stuff. And I want to say for the first couple days after the service, I didn't really do very much. I definitely didn't really eat. I think I was subsisting off of like coffee and soda. There really wasn't a lot of hard food involved. It was just, and it was the funny thing about that too is I'm still to this day shocked at how like little I drank during that initial period. It was just which is weird because you would have thought that you would have been like drowning yourself in a bottle, right? And I wouldn't judge anyone if they did that at that point, but I just thought it was odd because I would have expected that to have been a problem in the beginning, but it ended up not being so. But I remember, I wasn't shaving, I wasn't eating, I wasn't going to the gym, I wasn't really doing anything. We did have the saving grace that, we had family and friends actively living with us during this whole thing to help us with our son. that was a huge thing. I don't know how we would have survived without that, because there was just a lot of nights where I just did not feel like being dad, and likewise for her. A turning point for me was when I finally, one of the sports specialists for the National Guard called me and was like, "Hey, I know that you said you didn't really want to opt into any of the religious support, but one of the chaplains would like to meet you. He lost his son at 28 weeks. He doesn't want to preach to you or anything like that. But I think that you two should meet." And I was like, "Okay, that's fine." And that was the first time that I met. That was really one of the first times that I'd like really gotten a chance to sit down with another dad and talk. I had met with another father in group, and it wasn't anything personal. It just he was in a very different phase, I guess. I don't know, like one of the defining moments for me where his wife was talking about how hard everything was, and she was still really struggling, and he was like, I mean, I'm fine. I just kind of remember the good parts, and I'm glad that he was able to. It just wasn't relatable. His experience was not, and he would text me every once in a while, and honestly, I found it more irritating than helpful, because it felt like he was only doing it out of obligation, which, I mean, I guess I can appreciate that, but it wasn't helpful. So it was I felt very isolated and alone, and just didn't really feel like I had anybody there that just really truly got what I was going through. And when I met with him, it really changed that. I mean, we talked for several hours, and it was very therapeutic. And after our meeting, I got home and I got in the shower and I finally shaved. And that was shaving felt like, it was like, okay, it was like the first of what was going to be many, many, many steps of trying to get to a place of being at least somewhat better. After that, because me and my wife were on very similar planes, so it was eerie, like how mentally, like, so for example, in the days leading up to her service, when we were waiting to have her remains, you know, delivered to us and all that, because we'd opted to have her cremated, and Caitlin was sitting on the bed, and she was like, "I'm having a really hard time right now thinking about the fact that my daughter's laying in a freezer." And in just that moment, I had just been thinking again, having knowledge is not always an amazing thing, because I did clinical pathology lab, which said a lot for shape. And I just had, like, I was just thinking about that, about, like, where she was at. And um moments like that were really hard. I remember feeling a tremendous amount of relief when I did get the notification that she had finally been cremated, because the idea that she was still in that hospital in a cold room was hard. Because of course, we couldn't take her home, and it just, I hated that. I remember being extreme. Like, I remember feeling one of the very few moments of peace that I felt through this whole ordeal. That was definitely one of them, because it just seemed like she was, I don't know, free, I guess, or it was far more comforting to know that was, that her elements had kind of been returned to, to their base, carbon and everything, as opposed to sitting in a refrigerator. So we did reach a point, though, where me and my wife started butting heads. She started to I was having a hard time getting back into the being a father role. And it wasn't anything personally against my son. It was the fact that, you know, there was a moment where we were laying on the couch and she was pulling up, she had like a Facebook memory or whatever of Harrison's like first words or something. And I remember in that moment immediately feeling extremely bitter toward her. And because the thought in my head was like, well, that was great that you had that moment. I didn't get that. You have your son. I don't have my daughter. And it wasn't, and it's not as if she didn't experience the same level of loss, but there was a feeling of bitterness there that like, well, at least you have something. I don't have anything. And that was a very complicated emotion to navigate around. There were certainly some spirited discussions and everything that we butted heads a lot over stuff like that initially, because it was like, you can still be a mom. Like, what do I have? I mean, yeah, I still love my son. That hasn't changed, but I was robbed of everything that, you got to have all that. I don't, I won't know how strong her grip strength was. I don't know what it's like for a newborn to squeeze your finger when it's yours. You got to experience that. I didn't. And that was, like I said, that was probably one of the bigger challenges to navigate through. It was really hard. And it just took a lot of time and therapy, and we're thankfully past that now. But I remember that being, it's a unique situation for certain parents. I realize that's not going to be a fit for all of them. But for the other step parents out there, that was definitely, because one of the couples in our support group did have that dynamic. It was flipped though, where it was something where it was her biological child that they lost, and his stepkids. And that was, again, that relatability, having someone there that kind of gets it, to be able to connect with somebody else on that level of like, yeah, this is hard, still having to be the parent, but at the same time, because it's not like you actively resent your stepkids. It's just you resent the fact that and that was, like I say, that was probably one of the bigger hurdles to kind of navigate around. But we didn't know specifically what that hurdle was, though, and it was actually, my therapist actually kind of brought that up, and that she was like, well, and she kind of laid it out, as far as like why I was feeling that way, and the way that I explained it to you now, and I was like, oh. And I came home and I sat down with Caitlin, and I was like, look, I think one of the reasons why, after talking with my counselor and everything, I think one of the reasons why I've been a little bit heated with you with our son is because, during this time you've still got to be, you can still be mom, and you still had those memories with him, and I'll never have those. And I know that you lost her too, but I never got to experience anything like that. And, the therapist identified something else. We're talking through it, and again, it's that disparity between the experience between a mom and, a father, is the fact that I only had about maybe 25 minutes of actual physical contact with her. I felt her kick, but that's not the same. It's not the same. You're not feeling her. You're feeling a physical sensation through mom of her. It's not the same. Whereas, she had that sensation of actually being with her, all that whole time. So I felt robbed, in that aspect as well, that, and of course, again, no amount of time is ever going to be enough, but I felt very bitter in the fact that I only had less than a half hour with her. And that sucks. At least at least you had the 9 months, whatever. And once that was identified as a problem, I was able to, with some coaching and everything, fix that way of thinking to where it wasn't as negative and targeted toward her. And, that's really the trick in therapy, right? Is a lot of the times just identifying what the negative thought processes are and finding a healthier way of changing that thought process so you're not lashing out at people that, because it's not her fault. That's, and she's hurting just as bad, if not, it may be more in certain ways because she had all of that time with her. So it really is about, a real big survival tool with utilizing therapy is trying to change those patterns around where you're not blaming people that really just genuinely didn't have anything negative to do with it. It's not her fault at the time. There's nothing that she did. So that was, our son definitely had some behavior issues that popped up as well. We were pretty proactive with trying to get him into therapy and everything, and that's helped because he was always. I mean, he's a very good kid, but that was what made it easy to figure out that he was still going through some things though, because he was usually pretty passive and friendly, and he was having a couple bouts of aggression at school and whatnot, and it was odd because it was delayed, because initially we thought, oh, well, he seems like he's doing pretty well, but then it seemed to manifest itself later, and we identified that. It's not as much of a problem. He doesn't have the aggressive lashing out anymore, which is good. But I don't know. It fast forwarding to now. I say fast forwarding because it feels like forever ago, and it's only been about 4.5 months. Your perception of time is so skewed, and for me, especially lately, I've definitely, I still struggle with aggression. I still struggle with anger. I really, it's a problem. And one thing that I really wish that it was easier to do, honestly, sometimes is to cry, because there'll be some times where I will be upset, and I'll know that I'm hurting or something, and I can't quite get myself to get to that point of just being able to let it go. And so, you'll find a common denominator, with that problem is, well, you can't have this emotion, so, well, I can't make myself cry, but I can sure be angry. I can, fine, I can't cry. Well, I can yell. I can slam a door. I can, throw a plate. It's easy. It seems like in a primal sense, you're very easily wired to very quickly go to that emotion as a replacement. And if I ever figure out the total fix to that, I'll tell you. But right now, I don't have a solid answer on that. I will say that, it's the saving grace, at least it's not targeted. Usually when I have my more angry bouts, it's usually when I'm by myself and I'm kind of just trapped in my thoughts and everything. And, I'll want that release or whatever. And I, because, when I'm around other people, I've got to bottle everything up. Yeah. I at work, I've got to spend all of my mental energy on, being the happy, jovial, upbeat guy that everyone knows me to be, and then when I come home, I've got to be dad now, and I've got to take care of my wife, and, and she takes good care of me too. It's definitely not one-sided, but it's all this mental energy that you're expending, that when you finally get a moment alone, sometimes it just really builds up to a point where if you can't get yourself to cry, all you want to do is scream, and it's, I think the only thing one of the few things that has helped with that is I've been able to get back into a fitness regimen again, which that helps mitigate it. The problem with that though is, I can't just drop everything and go to the gym upset. So, that's really the tricky part, is managing that acute in the moment anger. Like say when I'm around my wife or my kid, I can usually, there's been moments where, there was one where my son was just having a real, and, Caitlin was handling, it get to a point where I was not going to be a kind parent anymore or handle whatever rationally. So I took the keys and I just left the house and just drove around the neighborhood for a little bit, and came back and by then he was in bed and asleep, and the house was a little more peaceful, and I was able to, kind of just breathe. Other moments, it's been helpful to go out and shoot. Um, the physical input of feeling like the kick of like the weapon and the loud bang and everything, the percussion and all that kind of helps to, as another outlet of getting that emotion out. I try not to hit things, because it just doesn't, even like healthy things to hit, it doesn't really do anything good. I think one of the times that I tried to hit something, I went outside with a bat and like with the intent that I was going to show a tree who was boss over one of these moments, and all it ended up doing was hurting my wrist because
The tree's pretty strong.
well, when I was going out there and going to town on the thing, like the reverberation from the bat over time, just so it ended, so now I've got to rehab my wrist and I'm angry. So at that point I was like, okay, well, hitting things even in a healthy, safe way is not going to help this. So it's tricky to navigate through that. I remember one of the only times where I've completely just lost my in front of other people was actually my first day back at work on the Army side, and I went into the office where I got a phone call from Caitlin, and the whole drive to work that morning was very emotionally charged anyway. So it was it was I don't know. I was already getting amped up just going in there, and one of the other soldiers there asked, I was like, "Hey man, how you holding up?" And I remember just feeling like this like tick inside of my head, and I was like, "You know what? I'll tell you how I'm holding up." And I obliterated that entire. I mean, like. Tossed one of the lockers across the room, broke one of the office chairs, flipped one of the. It was a moment. It was definitely a pretty like I did not have control over my other than refraining from hurting anybody. But I was going to destroy as many inanimate objects as possible. If there was a place that I was going to do it in, that was probably the best one to do it because I work at a training center, and I'm an instructor there, and all the other instructors we're all combat. So all of us have varying whatever, and so we're not strangers to outbursts sometimes. And I got to tell you, it was a very it was a very wholesome moment once, because while it was happening, it was just like, yeah, dude, I get it. Like, I don't know, there was no judgment from any of the other soldiers that were, the other instructors that were there with me. It was like they got it. It was, because we've all lost friends in combat scenarios and stuff. So it was like, yeah, I get it, bro. That you want me to find something else for you to throw? Like, it was. And so afterwards, once I finally exhausted myself, a couple of guys they came in and just held me, and it was nice. Like it was good to feel that, like, that warmth and that, like, just being able to just finally let go of something. And it was and it was funny because again, you mentioned, like, there's only been a couple defining moments where I've like felt this sense of peace, and I felt a sense of peace for the rest of that weekend that no amount of lorazepam or Xanax had been able to help me get. So I don't regret that moment at all. I'm glad that I had at least if it was going to happen, that it happened in that particular environment. But that was, it was just nice to be able to be around other guys that kind of just understood a sense of loss, and just, they saw the outburst and they weren't threatened by it or appalled by it or judgmental about it. It was like, yeah, I get it. Tracking, do what you need to do. And that was helpful. So yeah, the anger thing, and I know that there's I don't know. I'm not fortunate to know too many other dads, but the few that I do keep in touch with, that does seem to be another common denominator, is just the dealing with the anger, because most of us are not to take away from the working moms and all that, but or how hard it is to be a stay-at-home mom. But I know from my perspective, I'm juggling so many balls with going to work, going to school, being dad, being husband, being someone, people's friend and all that. It's very, you get so wrapped up in doing so many things that it's almost as if it stops you from really feeling the emotions that you need to feel. And again, that just manifests itself in more anger. Another good friend of mine, he's also very high functioning. I mean, this dude, like, he's on another tier than I am. I mean, this man gets up at like 5 a.m, goes to the gym, like, is just a rock star as far as, just go, 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 go. And, it's another example of where when you're leading that kind of lifestyle as a guy, you're not giving yourself the time to think about it. It's not like I'm distracting something. So in moments where I do have a minute to slow down and really realize the gravity of the situation, now are going to hit me in this hour or two that I have by myself. And it just manifests itself in this varying degrees of anger and aggression. And it's a very tricky thing to navigate, because you don't want to scare anybody. You don't want to, it's not healthy to break things, and you certainly don't in front of your kids. It's also just not something, I get why they don't talk about it, because they're like, oh, this guy's going to snap and just punch somebody or something. And it's like, no, I don't think for a second that the one particular friend that I was mentioning earlier, I don't think for a second that he would harm me. That's fine. Buy another plate. That ability to not be judged is very hard to come by. And again, why being able to, if I was going to have that outburst in a place, it was good that I had it where I was at, because I did not feel that sensation of judge, and it was very liberating. So like I said, if I ever find the true secret to letting go of that anger entirely, I'll certainly let you know. Write a book and make some money off of it. But yeah, that's it's tough. Something else that I find that I think is really important in this whole thing is that we, and everyone there's no guide or set time frame for when you have to do these things, but we personally have found it better. It's hard, but it's better to challenge yourself with things that make you uncomfortable. You can't avoid pregnant people for the rest of your life. You can't alienate, well, I guess you can. You shouldn't alienate your friends that get pregnant. And, so for example, we had a couple come over and make dinner for us. And this was maybe a week or two after Vanessa had passed away, and they had a 9-month-old girl. And, we were talking, they were so close to age and all that, and they were going to pass all of her girl clothes to us, and, this, that, and the other. And it didn't really click to any of us how horrible that scenario was until they were over making dinner for us, and how painful that was to have her there. So we did not necessarily spend very much time with them after that for a little while. There was a point there where it was like, let's go ahead and have dinner over there. And so when I say challenge yourself with certain things, you're going to have to put yourself in uncomfortable situations sometimes. But it's important to, I think, set goals and expectations. When I went over there, the goal was, I just need to be able to be around a young child without completely losing it. It's okay to feel things, but so we went over there, and it was a good night, and we it was it was difficult at moments, but you do it. And that I wasn't expecting, and I knew that that's where another boundary was. Where at one point, I'd work with flip flops over there, so I didn't have socks on, and their daughter grabbed my toe, and the tactile sensation of baby skin is very unique. And I remembered how, and it felt very similar to that. And it was just instant tears, and it was a very difficult and hard emotion to process in the moment. And that's where that's when I was like, okay, well, I'm definitely not going to try to hold anyone's child anytime soon, because I'm definitely not ready for that. We went to a friend's baby shower not too long ago, and that was something that right after the loss of Vanessa, forget about it. There's no way we're going to someone's baby shower. But that was, this girl in particular, while pregnant, mind you, drove us to the crematorium to pick up Vanessa's remains. They did things for us repeatedly throughout this whole ordeal, and it was something where I don't think either of us felt it was right to totally take away from her happy moment, because she deserves to be able to feel those things, and we wanted to be there. And so we showed up. We didn't spend a lot of time there. I think we were there for only about, because it was an all-day thing, but we showed up, hung out for a little while, had some snacks for about an hour, and then there was a certain point where it started getting a little emotionally tricky. And so we, at that point, we're like, okay, we're going to go ahead and we've got a couple things we have to take care of, so we're going to go. But the point is, we went, and it was hard, but we did it. And you process it, and that way you don't just completely shut out everyone around you, because really one of the biggest things that's helped us through all of this is the friends that we have. So if you're only a month out or 2 months out, yeah, I get it. If all of those things are hard, and maybe it takes 6 months, but the point is that like I said, there's no set time frame on when you should or have to do any of these things. But I would say that it's going to be better for you in the long term, I think, in conjunction with some sort of counseling, to occasionally challenge yourself with putting yourself in those uncomfortable situations. Because if you don't, you're just going to get ambushed with it at some point. Someone's going to come in the room with a newborn. You're going to have to deal with that. You're going to continue to see slews of hordes of pregnant women. It's just like when you buy a red car and you think, oh, I bought this red car because it was unique, and then suddenly everyone has a red car, and you're not special anymore. Well, after the loss of Vanessa, it was like, were there always this many pregnant women out in the wild? Like, so I think that, in conjunction with therapy, it's healthy over time at your pace, and don't overdo it. I'm still not at the point where I feel like I'd be comfortable with holding someone's new. I don't know when that'll be, but it certainly isn't now. I'm okay with being around it. It doesn't, not there yet. So still have some personal growth there, but that's okay. I think that
well, you were talking about how
you have to forgive yourself too. Yeah. That's something where you really, and when I say that, you're going to have bad days, and you're going to have days where maybe there's some people that have been able to abstain from it, but I haven't been one of those individuals. There's going to be days where you drink a lot. There's going to be days where if you smoke, maybe you smoke 10 packs a day. There's going to be days where you have those lows, and it's really important to give yourself a break and say that that's fine. Even if it's months after the fact, it's okay. It doesn't make you an alcoholic. It doesn't make you a weak person. That having been said, it's really, something that has really been enlightening for me as far as that aspect of things. I can see how easily it would be to slip into a pattern of addiction. And that's where I would caution that, as far as being self-aware or aware of your spouse, just kind of don't be preachy about it. But, there was that, and this has come up in group a couple times where it's like, you know, it's day 6 and you realize that you've drank moderately to heavily every night of that week so far. So you know what? I'm gonna take 2 nights off, and because I shouldn't be doing this every night, and making sure that you still have a check on yourself. And you go a couple days, and eventually you kind of break that pattern a little bit. And if you still have drinks every once in a while, or whatever it is you need to do, then fine. But I think that level of self-awareness and spot checking with your partner is important, because if you do get to that point where you can't stop, it's probably better to identify that problem sooner than later, because I can very much see, without that self-awareness, how easily it would be to slip into a pattern of addiction and get too deep into the hole, to where it makes it really difficult, because now you have to dig yourself out of that and what you're going through. So that would be a really big piece of advice for me, is that it's okay to have bad days or weeks, and far be it for me to judge anybody for using a substance to get a handle on their emotions sometimes, but just to realize that it's not going to fix it. And you have to make sure that you're very aware of your patterns with it, to make sure that you're not in, and not just with drinking. It's medications are great. I do use benzos, like lorazepam, but I'm in moderation. I make sure that I keep those are for the moments where it's like where I feel that that outburst building up, and that I don't feel like I'm going to be able to get a handle on. I use that for those moments where I'm feeling so low that I'm starting to think about things that aren't conducive to life anymore. So just, it's okay to use those medications. There's nothing wrong with them. I know that the addiction thing is scary, but that's where the self-awareness kind of comes into play. And as long as you know that you're using them healthy, and in the way that they're supposed to be intent, that it's okay. It's perfectly fine. That is what they are there for. And people have said, "Oh, you guys are so strong and everything," and I want to say back to, I am only as strong as my Xanax prescription sometimes. So don't give me too much credit, because there's just some days where it just is too much, and you just need something to, especially in that like beginning phase, especially because you just go day to day and you have that constant adrenaline dump, and it's just exhausting. And sometimes you just need something that is going to hit the off switch for a little bit, even if it's an hour, or to give you a couple hours of rest, something that can like override that fight or flight, sensation that you're just constantly feeling, because you need a break, and it's okay to get that, because you're not going to be able to heal if you're constantly feeling that way. And honestly, the stresses on your body are going to be worse than the effects of the medication, especially over time. So and something that I noticed that was kind of an interesting phenomenon with, because I'd started on, my doctor had increased the, I was on, it's a medication called Vibrid, and it's antidepressive medication. And it's worked really well for me. It's great in the sense that it doesn't have the weight gain side effects or a lot of the sexual side effects that a lot of those SSRIs typically do. But when she upped the dosage, it kind of numbed me out a lot. It kept me, because there'd be times where, I'd be down here and then up here and up here, it just, if you put my emotions at a wavelength, they were like really wide. Whereas when I was on the medication, it kind of kept me here. Problem with that, though, is that if something good happened,
You don't feel
my
the
reaction
highs.
to it was almost the same as when something bad happened.
Yeah.
My emotional range was deadened significantly. And I actually think that some of my anger problems were peaking while I was on that medication at some point, because it was numbing me out too much. And so I went to my doctor and I was like, I want to reduce my medication and kind of see, what it looks like. And so she cut it in half, and, or well, of course, with any of those SSRIs and everything, you don't ever want to just stop or change doses abruptly. You always want to taper, because they have, you've got to give your brain time, for all those chemicals and everything to readjust. You're going to have a whole slew of side effects that are just nightmarish to deal with. So just taper let your doctor taper you. Don't just abruptly stop taking something like that. But once the tapering was done and I was back to half the dose that I was on, I was able to feel a wider range of emotions again, and a lot of, the frequency of anger and outbursts dropped significantly. It was very apparent that was a contributing factor, because it was not allowing me to process and feel things the ways that I should have been feeling them. Going back to my earlier point of, you're busy all the time, so you're not giving it. That's another recurring theme in therapy here, is giving yourself time to really process and feel things, because it's going to manifest later. You can hide it all you want to, or tuck it away, or pretend it's not there. And whether, go ahead and ask any Vietnam vet or whatever, how well, I mean, it comes back to any kind of PTSD, or strong emotional, thing like that. It comes back eventually. You might be able to fight it off for a year, 5 years, 10, 20, 30. Eventually it is going to come back to you. So it's just, I think, hugely important to deal with it in the moment before it manifests into something far, far worse. That was one of the reasons why I started to. It's by no means big or anything. Right now it consists of me, a Facebook page, and some really well-designed business cards, and the chaplain that I work with, that I mentioned earlier. I had the idea to maybe start like an informal group, for dads, for that relatability piece, as a platform that, I use it as a digital journal, so that, as people join the group, they can see in real time the things that I've been feeling over time. And if while they're reading that, they're like, oh man, yeah, I remember feeling like that. Because there'll be times where I, text a buddy of mine about, what I'm thinking about or feeling, and, because we're at very similar time frames, and he's like, yeah, I was like that yesterday, so it's, that relatability is huge. And that area where you can express, like, yeah, the other day, like, all I wanted to do was put my foot through a wall, and to be able to express those things and be like, yeah, I get it. That sucks. I had to stop myself from, taking a door off the hinges the other day, or, I'm just having a really hard time with this, or me and my wife are fighting about this, and just ways for you to get an outlet out there that's, healthy and productive and relatable. Because while there is a lot of uniqueness to this as far as how people are going to feel, there's also a lot of common themes too. And a lot of those common themes have pretty common answers. But you're not going to know that unless you've talked to somebody who's been there before. There's stages of this that I haven't been to yet, that I can't really. I don't know what things look like 6 months down the road, or a year, or 2 years. Which is why over time I kind of hope that, the group grows a little bit. And I've worked with a couple resources around here that if it gets to where, we want to have meetings or something, if the group actually grows, then, I have a couple options to facilitate that, because there's just, in group, one thing I've noticed first of all, when a lot of dads see these groups and everything, they assume that it's just for the mom. And even when the dads do show up, and I'm guilty of this too, my wife will go and talk and everything, and I feel like I have to hold back when I'm around her, especially even when she's home and she's really upset. I feel compelled to, and to be there for her, or to help her through it. And it's not, and I'm not a very emotionally closed off person. I have no problem with crying in front of her or anything like that, or, it's just, in that moment, it doesn't feel, there's sometimes where, yeah, crying together is appropriate and helpful, but other times it just seems like it's going to do more harm than good if both of us are an emotional wreck. So let me pull it together so that I can help her. And so to have a space where, you don't have that pressure of having to be the strong one for your wife next to you, I think, for me anyway, is hugely beneficial, and is kind of nice So that's kind of what I hope to achieve, long term if it takes off. And if it doesn't, then that's okay. I'll still have a digital, like say a digital journal and everything of, my experiences throughout this whole thing that I can reflect on, in the future. But it's called Fathers of Lost Angels. And like I say, I have on the group thing, I actually have I have it tied into a phone number. People can text it, call it, or they just find the group on there. And I actually created a page within a page. There's like an organization page, and then there's like a private subgroup, and where that's the intended place for like the conversation pieces and everything. So it's not like it's not in public view. People can't see your comments and stuff and whatnot. Because some of the other groups that are more that are public and open, it's just you don't. I feel like it defeats the purpose if your business is like out there, for everyone and whatnot to read. I feel like that's contradictory to what what I'm going for. So I don't know. We'll see. We'll kind of see how that pans out.
Well, thanks, man. It is one of those. A lot of what you've said has resonated with me because I too have felt a lot of what you are feeling, and we're a year and a half out, coming on our second year, and what you're going through, I remember exactly what I felt in those times. 4 months out, 5 months out. I think you're
yeah, about 4.5. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's, just a lost feeling of just, yeah. Thanks for talking to me, Alfonso.
Yeah.
I'd personally like to thank Alfonso for coming on the podcast and sharing his emotions and how he is dealing with the death of his daughter. I'd also like to thank him for starting that Facebook group. You could find a link to his Facebook group on our show notes, and you could also find a full transcript of this interview and any other resources mentioned. You could sign up for a short and helpful email newsletter. On the website, you could also learn how you could become a patron and support the work it takes to produce the show for just a few dollars a month. And there you could also find out how to get in touch with us if you would like to share your child's story on the show. The show was produced and edited by Winter and Lee Red. Thanks to Josh Woodward for letting us use his song, She Dreams in Blue. You could find him at joshwoodward.com. Lastly, subscribe to the podcast and share it with a friend that might need it, and tell them to subscribe. Why? Because people need to know that even though our babies are no longer with us, they're still a part of us. It's only when you look at an ant through a magnifying glass on a sunny day that you realize how often they burst into flames. Harry Hill.